From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
As the clock ticks down to the end of the regular session, it all comes down to money. A fight over tying additional special education funding to new policies and which tax compromise will win its way to the governor's office. She likes one, the House another. But first, a cyber fight? Or is it an attack? The sudden disappearance of a Kansas news agency from Facebook with First Amendment implications. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. Thanks so much for joining us. It all started quietly Thursday morning as links to the Kansas Reflector began simply disappearing from Facebook. Posters getting a message they had violated community standards on cybersecurity. Cake's Nick Nelson shows us what happened.
From about 8:30 to about 3:30 this afternoon, we were on a no-fly list for reasons that Facebook won't tell us.
Editor-in-Chief Sherman Smith and the rest of the staff at the Kansas Reflector were left confused after Facebook appeared to take down every link to articles on its website that had ever been posted.
Around 8:50, I think, that we got our first notice from readers that they were being notified all of their links to our articles had been removed. Any post that had a link to any story of any kind that we had ever published in 4 years was being removed.
The Reflector is a nonprofit independent news service that mostly covers Kansas politics. Their Facebook page and Facebook users who had posted links received a notification saying the link violated the company's community standards on cybersecurity. This lasted about 7 hours on Thursday, until the issue was suddenly fixed.
We learned from our readers that they were being notified around 3:30 this afternoon that their posts were being restored, and when we tested it, we found that we could post links again as well.
The issue began around the same time that the Reflector attempted to post an opinion piece critical of Facebook's advertising methods. Smith says although the link issue appears to be fixed, he's still wondering what might have caused the issue.
As the article this morning mentioned, local media has a bigger imprint still than Facebook, and is so important in getting information and news out to people.
Well, here to tackle this and other topics today, we have Dr. Neil Allen, a political scientist from Wichita State University, and Dion Leffler, the opinion editor from the Wichita Eagle. Thank you both for coming in last minute, because we did have lawmakers set for this episode, except they're still in Topeka, still working on issues, which we're going to be talking on this show, but they haven't finished, surprisingly, so we're going to take it up for them. You and I, Diane, were talking about this. In the wake of Marion County especially, I think there was a lot of concern that this was a directed attack.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are several theories of what happened, and Facebook is not saying what happened. I guess is the best way to say it. They somewhat bizarrely, one of their PR people somewhat bizarrely posted an apology on a competing social media site, X, saying, oh, it was a mistake and we're sorry. But the thing is, it's like, this was bad. This was really bad.
Yeah.
You attacked the credibility of one of the most credible news sources in Kansas, and simultaneously accused thousands and thousands of Kansans of being cyber criminals. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, it just said that, the one that I got said that I had either tried to collect personal information or posted malicious software.
Yeah.
And, I didn't do that. I shared a story from a reputable news site to my timeline. And that's how this is all supposed to work. So it just, it just floors me. And, you've tried to reach them. I've tried to reach them. Chance Swaim tried to reach them. Their phone number is basically a "we don't care" message that hangs up on you. And then their media relations department is where emails go to die.
Very true. I can't tell you the number of stories over the years where I needed comment from Facebook, and I'm still waiting.
Yeah.
Well, but and I guess this shows some of the problems of modern life, that Facebook in effect is a public utility that is run by a private company, and people come to depend upon that for connecting to the outside world. Now, I happen to miss the Facebook bandwagon when it was up, and frankly, I have a Facebook account so that whenever I happen to be with you, Pilar, on Facebook Live on election night for Cake TV, that my family can watch, and so that I can look at the finest day-to-day local news source for Wichita politics. It is in the Wichita Eagle, my friend Chase Billingham's Facebook page. But Facebook is not a trusted media company. They're not a trusted public forum. They are a large multinational corporation that has interests, and also I'm sure has a lot of incompetence. And also, the idea of calling Facebook and getting them to tell you why something happened, I'm not surprised that you haven't had any success with it. But also it just shows that, especially with the Kansas Reflector, which is a free website, kansasreflector.com, that if the more people go directly to news sources, the more people have subscriptions to those that are for profit, like the Wichita Eagle, the better off we're going to be, because the current media landscape has serious problems. And frankly, I'm more worried right now in this community about the fact that the city of Wichita is basically going to designate its own website as a media source, so they don't have to pay the Eagle anymore to put mandated public advertisements in some news source. And there's problems all across the country with this, in Florida, just basically communities throwing up random websites so they don't have to pay to have their public announcements anymore. But I don't really necessarily have a solution, but we should definitely praise the fact that the Kansas Reflector is a nonprofit free news site that covers the Kansas legislature and Kansas politics. And doing that is harder and harder, because the profit motive is so much around social media, which doesn't always have the interests of actual people at its heart.
Sorry, and this is an issue. For a lot of it, it's a case of AI bots, whatever you want to call them, going through and clicking on, catching on some word and saying, oh, well, this must be a bad post, and taking it down. I just in the last 2 days have heard from people who've had their mother's obituary taken down because it violated community standards. A candidate running for office who had political posts that were about community issues taken down. Things like that. Somebody had a Bible verse taken down. So we have been, over the last few years, we've kind of gotten accustomed to, oh, well, I'm in Facebook jail. They took down this post or whatever, and oftentimes it seems laughably ridiculous that it was taken down, but when it then impacts an entire news organization.
And an entire state.
Yeah.
Right
in the middle of a very busy news period for the organization.
Exactly.
No less.
Probably on the very worst day to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just, my working theory is that they unleashed some sort of Terminator AI bot to clean up the site, and that the Reflector's collateral damage. That the AI couldn't distinguish between fake news and coverage of the Kansas legislature, which is always somewhat surreal.
And that's a whole nother.
But I think because the other thing I noticed yesterday was I would get at least, I would get like a fake news post per hour. Mm-hmm. And they were always about Colin Kaepernick, Leah Thomas,
Culture wars.
Yeah, and I get these obviously fake news posts, mm-hmm. and those all disappeared yesterday too. So
that's true. I wasn't thinking about it, but you're right. I didn't see many of those yesterday.
Yeah. So I think they tried to pull the plug on them, mm-hmm. and they caught the Reflector in the backlash.
And that would certainly go with the tweet that they put out saying that it was a mistake, yada yada. They weren't supposed to be part of this. So
yeah. But the guy who put the tweet out on Twitter or X, sorry. Sorry, Elon.
It's always going to be Twitter to me. I'm sorry.
But the guy who put the tweet out on X, as far as I can tell, he doesn't even have a Facebook page.
Yeah.
So it's like, what, why don't you put this on your own social network? I mean, it's just bizarre.
Yeah. All right. Well, many other things going on. As we mentioned at the time we recorded this episode, the state legislature was still in session, fighting primarily over what else? Money. Not too unusual for the end of the regular session. One of the biggest fights over who gets a tax cut and by how much. Rebecca Chung with the KSN Capitol Bureau has the latest shots fired.
Yeah, well, I've been tracking this bill all night, and shocking developments in the House. They're defying GOP leaders and the governor, who touted this plan as a compromise. Now, this bill would have maintained the state's three-tier income tax system. The only change would have been to the top bracket. It would drop from 5.7% to 5.5%. Keep in mind, people who make $30,000 or more fall into that bracket. But the House says no deal. One Democrat also voting against the latest tax relief plan in the Senate earlier today, and he says he's not a fan of bundling bills.
That's what's been a problem with the process. The bundling has allowed the state chamber and those who have got to lower that highest marginal state income tax rate. That has been their mantra. I think it is a chaotic journey to stupidity, but that's what they want to go.
As for House members, they want Senate negotiators to take up parts of their bill, which was scrapped last week. It would have gotten rid of the bottom tax bracket of 3.1% and decrease the two top brackets by 0.05%. Supporters say it would provide more relief.
Now, lots of different numbers flying there, but what it comes down to is right now, we don't have a tax cut bill headed to the governor's office. The governor has said if they don't have a tax cut bill by the end of session, she's going to call a special session. The last thing they want in an election year.
Well, I mean, and also the legislators would rather not be in Topeka. Now, I could go on a rant here about how that maybe a part-time legislature is not the best way to do things, and also that I think the leadership of the legislature has been overshooting for years now as to how quickly they can get things done and when they can actually schedule their recess in April. But on the matter at hand, I mean, the voters of Kansas keep giving the government of Kansas conflicting communication about this. Is that Governor Kelly is both won election and re-election on a platform of not doing the Brownback tax cuts again. We know that. But also, we as Kansans elect a legislature that is majority Republican and committed to having taxes on income cut. Now, the compromise that seemed to have votes a couple of days ago seemed a pretty decent kick the can down the road. Governor Kelly would get a very popular position, which is cut the sales tax on food and cut it more or less immediately and don't phase it out. And the Republicans in the legislature would get a small but significant cut in the income tax for top earners. But in reality, I think we'd be just as well off as to speed up the cut in to zero in sales tax on food and just leave everything else the way it is and come back next year, hopefully with more money, because we don't have consensus in Topeka.
No. And you and I were talking before the show, Diane, they don't actually have to legally have a tax cut bill to go home for the session.
Yeah, no, I mean, if it doesn't pass, then status quo remains. And we keep paying taxes at the rate we're paying taxes. And the state, I guess, will continue to build a surplus, which is probably not the worst thing that could happen, because, someday we're going to elect another Sam Brownback. And we're going to try the tax experiment all over again. They've been pushing for the flat tax for how many years?
But we should note, though, that even the flat tax bill that passed both houses of the legislature and that the governor vetoed is a different kind of tax cut than that which we had under Governor Brownback. Under Governor Brownback and his allies in the legislature, we zeroed out a whole class of businesses from income tax and also made it much easier to get into that class of non-taxpayers. So we're really talking about marginal changes. But the legislature is seemingly unwilling to compromise with Governor Kelly. And I should say here also that there's a giant compromise that would still be possible, which is the governor gets Medicaid expansion, the Republicans get probably pretty much any tax cut bill that they can get through their own ranks. But that deal is not going to get to the floor, probably ever in Kansas.
No.
Well, anytime you have a headline.
They've shown this session they cannot get the flat tax through their own ranks right now.
Well, anytime you have a headline that says, Kansas legislature fails to compromise, it's probably.
Well, that's a day that ends in Y.
Yeah, it just, it just, they're not geared for compromise.
No.
And, in this case, it's just, everybody wants to do it, but the other thing is the opposition was bipartisan.
Mm-hmm.
It was clearly, it was clearly a group of Democrats and a group of Republicans, that are opposed to this, and so there's not the usual party line to, to go and like twist people's arms.
Yeah. Well, taxes aren't the only money fight in Topeka this week. Not the only one that's also crossing the aisle. Kansas Public Schools and their supporters are taking on lawmakers over a proposal to increase special education funding. Friday morning, the Kansas Reflector reported Kansas senators had killed a school finance bill that would have guided state education funding for the next 3 years. The move came after public school advocates warned the bill's special education provision would have permanently underfunded K-12 schools. The bill would have overhauled the state's special education funding formula using money from the LOB or local option budget dollars as part of the calculation. Public education advocates say that would have masked a lack of state funding. Legislative supporters said the bill would have provided the transparency and accountability school funding needs. But in a late night vote, senators came out 12 to 26 across the aisle against it. Senator Chase Blasey said he couldn't support the bill due to hometown opposition. And he probably wasn't alone in that, because if there's one thing Kansans have shown that they care about, it's their schools.
Oh yeah, and there's been this, over the years, just transferring more and more and more and more from the state to the local property taxpayers. And it's very popular in some parts of the state because they have large tax bases. And in parts of the state where they don't, well, our hands are tied.
And there's a lot of this, of the rhetoric involved that seems very, very familiar if you followed state spending and school funding for any length of time. We just got out of a 10-year-long school funding lawsuit that was just ended. How much do you think that perhaps the fear of another lawsuit may have played in this?
Well, the Gannon lawsuit was ended by the state Supreme Court, although it could be resurrected by the school districts again if we see another large cut in school funding. But here, a lot of the issue is about whether or not we fully fund special ed, and also if we say we do, what that actually means. And so if we are now going to count local option property taxes as in effect new money for special ed and then say that we've solved the problem, then that doesn't do anyone any good. And also, Diane brings up a good point, that whenever we have so much of school funding that is done by local property taxes, then we have disparities no matter what, because there are massive differences in property valuations. And even though valuations have been going up across Kansas, they're going up different amounts in different places. And other states have solved this problem and made things more transparent by going the other direction, by having more money on the state budget. And then local schools have more flexibility, and also the kinds of choice plans that a lot of conservative Republicans want, they work a lot better if the state is funding more of the public education, because then when a student goes from one district to another, even if it's nearby, more of the money goes with them. But now, if you put choice plans into place, you're going to break the budget of a lot of schools and also move a lot of of the parents who can't afford the extra time out of one school and into another, and hurt the school that they're leaving. And so sadly, the choice here is probably more tax money from the state into schools, which is not what the legislature wants to be doing.
Yeah. Well, and you talked about the equity issue, and that equitable and adequate was the basis of most of these school funding lawsuits that we've seen.
Oh yeah, and you know, I mean, I covered that thing pretty much all the way through, and you know, I'll probably be retired before before we could get through another one of those.
Yeah.
But it just, you know, it just, I mean, crying out loud. I mean, are we really arguing in this state over whether we can adequately fund education for handicapped children? That's what it really comes down to. I mean, what kind of state are we? You know, that seems so basic to our mission, you know, to the mission of an educational system, that it's mind-blowing that, you know, there's this much controversy over it.
All right. Well, not every bill working its way through the legislature made it to the finish line. One that had bipartisan support to prevent suicides appears to be lost for the year. We go back to Cake's Nick Nelson for an explanation.
Our 23-year-old son died by suicide over 2 years ago. And it came as a complete shock.
As shocking as Jennifer Dennis losing her son was, her discovery of what led to her son William taking his own life may be even more disturbing. Dennis said her son was on a website that encouraged people to commit suicide. Jill Janes is also part of that club that no parent ever wants to be a part of. She lost her son Max to suicide. Now these two want to make it a crime to encourage someone to end their own life.
Any suggestion, the power of suggestion to someone who is not mentally well is extremely influential. And if we continue to have out-of-date laws, we will continue to see this trend.
However, once the first draft of the bill got to the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chair Kelly Warren, a Republican from Johnson County, shelved it. That was until Representative Stephen Owens of Heston amended a bill of his that already passed the House to include penalties for suicide encouragement.
And these are the bills that ran across the House floor, Senate floor, passed nearly unanimously in each chamber, but we're putting them together so that we can make sure that the good work that the House of Representatives did gets into conference.
Janes and Dennis want people to reach out to the Senate and to give the bill a chance in conference committee so it can be passed.
If this legislation is not passed, this will continue to happen. We have a moment in time to get this passed right now and to cause change and to protect people. And suicide rates, they're climbing, and this can happen to anybody, any family.
And as we look at this case, the accusation from one side and the other is that this was a case of politics, playing politics. And a couple of different possible reasons out there, but we see that all the time at the State House.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is another piece of, you know, just like the last one, you know, this is another piece of, come on, man. You know, it's like, you can't even get together on a bill that says suicide is bad. You know, what? I don't understand the thinking, and I really don't care about the politics. It's just, you know, set it aside, pass the bill, and, you know, hopefully fewer people will die. You know, I mean, it doesn't seem that hard. No. But, you know, it's Topeka.
It is Topeka. What do you think, Neil?
Well, I mean, that, you know, when you have a legislature that runs on a short session, things often don't make it. And in this case, I mean, you know, there are some serious concerns that I would have if I was voting on something like this in the legislature. There are First Amendment concerns. There also are concerns about whether this would criminalize, you know, offhand remarks in a way that might not necessarily, you know, help us to reach not just the people that are being bullied at this level, but also the people that are bullying. But frankly, you know, that we don't have enough mental health resources in this state, that you know, a bill like this would cost nearly nothing and would seem like it's an easy lift for the legislature. But what would be much more effective is a significant increase in mental health funding, especially directed towards schools. Because where this bill could have some real effect is hopefully to get some teenager to think, I'm not going to post something awful about someone who I've had some problem with at school. And and if that would save one life, then it would be worth it. But also, a massive increase in mental health funding could have a positive ripple effect across the board, but that takes money, and this legislature would rather money go to cutting taxes for those who already have a lot.
Well, of course, this has been just the tip of the iceberg of what's come out of the legislature this week. Some other action that we have seen include bills to move forward. We have a bill that would create the felony crime of engaging in physical, financial, or documentary coercion to compel a woman to end a pregnancy she wants to continue. It would let courts impose up to a 25-year sentence. It now awaits the governor's signature or veto. Bain's Law is also headed to the governor's desk. Inspired by a suspect's strangling of a Sedgwick County canine officer last year, this bill would levy a sentence of up to 3 years in prison for killing a police animal, an arson dog, a game warden's dog, or a search and rescue dog. 5 years if the killing happens while the suspect is trying to get away from police. Now, joining them is a bill that would allow Kansas microbreweries to self-distribute beer and hard cider to licensed beer and wine distributors, retailers, public venues, clubs, caterers, etc., as well as on the brewery's own premises. And after several years of trying but falling short, a bill that would prevent local governments from banning plastic bag bans or any other plastic has made it out of the legislature. If the governor allows it to become law, it would effectively nullify Lawrence's plastic bag ban that went into effect March 1st. So we've got 1 minute left. What are we missing?
Well, I got to say, I'm with the legislature on the plastic bags.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I looked into this, and studies have shown that the cities that have passed these bans, there's been a corresponding increase in the purchase of plastic trash bags, and that people use these bags. They put their trash in them, and they take, they bring their groceries in and they take their trash out. And in cities that don't have them, there's been a corresponding increase in buying plastic bags, which are bigger and heavier.
But that's a question for the local government to answer. And so here in Wichita, we don't have a ban on plastic bags. I'm glad, because if we didn't have plastic bags from Walmart, we wouldn't have trash bags.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, guys. We are out of time. Thanks so much. Thank you for watching. Have a great week.